Hi everybody, my name is Beatriz de Castro. I'm a political economy and philosophy student. I'm also part of Tulane's ethics ball team that works with the Murphy Institute. And I'm gonna give Tulane's land acknowledgement. We acknowledge and pay tribute to the original inhabitants of this land. The city of New Orleans is a continuation of an indigenous trade hub on the Mississippi River, known for thousands of years as Bolvancha. Native peoples have lived on this land since time immemorial, and the resilient voices of Native Americans remain an inseparable part of our local culture. With gratitude and honor, we acknowledge the indigenous nations that have lived and continue to thrive here.
All right, thank you everyone for showing up. Those of you who are live streaming, the two most important announcements that I'm apparently in charge of. First, if you are here, silence your cell phones, please. We don't want the disruptions of all that. Second, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to smash the like button, subscribe, and click the bell. I'm Chad Van Schulent. I'm the director of the Center for Ethics. We're very glad to have you here, and I just want to take a brief moment to let you know about some of the many activities that the Center for Ethics has that we encourage you to get involved in. As Beatrice just noted, one of those programs for undergraduates is that we support the Tulane Ethics Bowl team. I encourage you, if you're interested, we have some of the members right up front. Please talk to them. They'll be happy to tell you about the team. They're currently preparing to go up to Boston to compete, and very excited about the team. We also work with local high school ethics bowl teams, and we work with undergraduate service learners to be able to fulfill that requirement and serve the community, working to develop collaborative communication skills around very difficult and controversial topics, like some of what we'll discuss today. Other things that we have, that we support the Tulane Journal of Policy and Political Economy. For graduate students, we have a dissertation fellowship. I see some of the fellows are here currently. And that's for people of all different majors, different disciplines. If you're working on issues of ethics at the dissertation stage, there's a similar program for the Center for Public Policy Research. We also, for faculty, we currently have open our applications to our Visiting Faculty Fellows program. So that's just at least some of the many things that we do besides our wonderful public lectures that we're very happy that Carl Hart is here to kick us off for. I'm not going to be emceeing. You have the luck that instead it will be the great Professor Gary Hoover. Hoove is a professor of economics at Tulane, as well as the executive director of the Murphy Institute. He's a specialist in issues of economic inequality, its sources, its nature, and he has a recent book, Lottery, Economic Promises and the Reality of Who Gets Ahead. I'll hand it over to Hoove.
Hey everybody, I'm excited that you are here. I'm excited that our guest is here, and I'm really impressed that there is a contingent of Tulaneans and community folks who are not outside at the football festivities, that you found your way in here to be otherwise entertained and enlightened by Dr. Hart. So let me tell you just a bit more about the Murphy Institute and its programs real quick. We have 2 degree programs here. We have a bachelor's degree in political economy, and we have a master's degree in political economy with emphasis on data analytics. We have 3 centers. We have the Center for Ethics, and one of the things that the Center for Ethics does is bring people like Dr. Hart here today. We have a Center for Public Policy Research. We're going to be having a huge conference coming up soon, and we have a Center for Law and the Economy. So those 5 units make up all of what Murphy does, and all I have to do is to introduce speakers, and then mostly my job at the Murphy Institute is over. So, speakers. Let me tell you about Dr. Carl Hart. He is the Mamie Phipps Clark Professor of Psychology and Psychiatry and chair of the Department of Psychology at Columbia University. He also holds a joint appointment in the Department of Psychiatry at the Columbia University Irving Medical Center, a neuroscientist, psychologist, and educator. Dr. Hart is one of the preeminent experts in the field of neuropsychopharmacology. He has received numerous awards for his research, writing, and teaching. Dr. Hart has published over 100 scientific and popular articles. In 2022, the American Association for Social Psychiatry recognized his contributions with the Abraham L. Halpern Humanitarian Award for his advocacy on behalf of human rights and drug policy. His book, High Price, was the 2014 winner of the Penn/E.O. Wilson Literary Science Writing Award. His latest book, Drug Use for Grown-Ups, has changed the national conversation on responsible drug use. Dr. Hart continues to contribute to national and international conversations on drug policy, public health, and social justice through academic research, public engagement, and policy advocacy. Dr. Hart's lecture today is sponsored by the Murphy Institute's Center for Ethics, Tulane School of Medicine's MS program in bioethics and medical humanities, the J. Richard Williams Sr., MD, 1931 Lecture Fund, and Tulane University's Department of Psychology. I assure you his talk will be much more interesting than that introduction, but you didn't come here to hear me. Dr. Hart, take it away, show us all. Help me in welcoming Dr. Hart.
Thank you all for coming out. I really appreciate it because I know you all could be doing something else, like getting high or something. So thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. This is, I've been to New Orleans quite a bit, but I haven't been here since 22. As who mentioned, I got that award from the American Psychiatric Association, and the guy who was the chair of the division that gave me the award, he and his fiance, who is about 15 years younger than him, two white people, and myself went to dinner in celebrating this award. His fiance went to the bathroom, and she was followed by a couple of women who thought that I was trafficking her to her fiance. So thank you all for being here and not calling the police on me for trafficking. So thank you. When I talk about the subject that I'm going to talk about today, sometimes I feel like it's like trying to explain to people that laughter is good. You all feel me? You all here? Come on now. I'm from the South too, and we kind of are in the house. And so sometimes people say what I say is controversial, and it's quite remarkable in a country that claims freedom or liberty. And so having researched drugs for about 30 years, please forgive me if I am shocked at some of the responses when I say that people take psychoactive drugs to have a good time. So you all with me? Yeah, we're in the house? Okay, so all right, the talk is called Drug Use for Grown-Ups, where liberty, policy, and science collide. Actually, they kind of explode, but let me just kind of tell you the format. The format is simple. I used to think that policy followed science. You know, like we learned something, and then so therefore we We learn something with empirical information, not anecdote. And then we make policies to try to make sure that the population is safe. But it doesn't actually work that way. The way it works with drugs, policy happens before we have information. And hysteria typically kind of parades as evidence and information. And so the talk will be like that. I'll talk about policy. I'll use a couple drugs that I studied, methamphetamine, cocaine, and I'll talk about cannabis and a little bit about heroin or opioids in terms of policy, the policy surrounding those drugs. And then I'll talk about the science, and then I'll have some thoughts about liberty. And then we'll open this thing up, and Hoove and I'll have a discussion, and then you guys get a chance, okay? So if you will, come back with me to the mid-1980s. In the mid-1980s, well, between 1984 and 1988, I served in the Air Force. I did 4 years. Largely, my time was overseas. And I only mention that just so people understand, particularly in this time where we have this jingoistic kind of fake patriotism where people say, thank you for your service, not really knowing what you did. Like me, I did very little in the military, but I did serve, and I don't expect to be thanked for my service. I got a lot out of it, and most people who serve were like me. You know, we were just grunts, basically, and nothing special. It was what we do is what we all do in terms of service. So just understand that I tell you that so you understand that when I got out in 1988, I wanted to continue my service to the public. In 88, around that time, one of the major things that was happening was crack cocaine. Before crack cocaine was a major issue in the United States, cocaine itself was kind of glamorized, beginning particularly in the late 1960s and all the way through the early 80s. And cocaine was seen as the drug for the wealthy people, people who had expendable income. But about that time, the guy who would eventually become Jimmy Carter's drug czar, Peter Bourne, said that cocaine should be legal. Basically, cocaine was, as he pointed out, probably one of the most benign of the illicit drugs. And he was saying that at least a stronger case could be made for legalizing it as legalizing marijuana. He would eventually be fired from being Jimmy Carter's drug czar because someone took a picture of him snorting cocaine. Turns out, if you're in the government, you used to, this doesn't apply today, but if you broke the law, you didn't keep your job. Doesn't apply anymore. But at that time, he was fired as a result. But still, cocaine earlier was, in early 80s, was for the wealthy, for people who were glamorous. But then crack hit. The first reports, late 1984, and things started to change. Just so we're clear, crack is smokable cocaine. Some industrious dealers figured out how you could make a rock form of cocaine and sell it cheaper, like as cheap as $5 for a hit. Therefore, it increased the sort of availability of it and decreased the exclusivity of it. And then the report started to change. As this kind of shows, it says like once for the elite, cocaine now is an equal opportunity vice. It's a vice now. So the media reporting started to vilify the drug user, the drug itself, the drug users, drug dealers. They were no longer glamorous, they were villains. In '86, September, we got Ronald Reagan and Nancy, Well, actually, I'll play this. This is Ronald and Nancy speaking to the country about this serious, important issue. This issue so serious, not homelessness, not employment, drugs, so serious that we needed our president to give us a lecture.
Today, there's a new epidemic, smokable cocaine, otherwise known as crack. It is an explosively destructive and often lethal substance which is crushing its users. It is an uncontrolled fire. And drug abuse is not a so-called victimless crime. Everyone's safety is at stake when drugs and excessive alcohol are used by people on the highways or by those transporting our citizens or operating industrial equipment. Drug abuse costs you and your fellow Americans at least $60 billion a year. From the early days of our administration, Nancy has been intensely involved in the effort to fight drug abuse.
I'm especially concerned about what drugs are doing to young mothers and their newborn children. Listen to this news account from a hospital in Florida of a child born to a mother with a cocaine habit. Nearby, a baby named Paul lies motionless in an incubator, feeding tubes riddling his tiny body. He needs a respirator to breathe and a daily spinal tap to relieve fluid buildup on his brain. Only 1 month old, he's already suffered 2 strokes. Now you can see why drug abuse concerns every one of us, all the American family. Drugs steal away so much. They take and take until finally, every time a drug goes into a child, something else is forced out, like love and hope and trust and confidence. Drugs take away the dream from every child's heart and replace it with a nightmare. And it's time we in America stand up and replace those dreams. Each of us has to put our principles and consciences on the line, whether in social settings or in the workplace, to set forth solid standards and stick to them. There's no moral middle ground. Indifference is not an option. We want you to help us create an outspoken intolerance for drug use.
So this video it nicely kind of encapsulates the kind of mood or the feeling in the country. And I just want to be clear that it wasn't just Republicans, it was Democrats, it wasn't just white folks, it was black folks, it was everyone in the country who felt as if crack was the enemy. It was the thing that was destroying the country. And so we said that crack was uniquely addictive. Only one hit, in many cases, people were saying was enough to make people get hooked or addicted. We said that the effects were unpredictable. So unpredictable, crack killed 2 young athletes at the peak of their powers. Len Bias was the #2 pick in the 1986 NBA draft. He got drafted, went out, celebrated, and he died. And they said it was crack cocaine that killed him. A week later, Don Rogers, who was the previous year's Defensive Rookie of the Year for the Cleveland Browns, he was out celebrating and died, and crack cocaine was blamed. We were concerned about the violence that crack caused in its users, and of course, we were concerned about the effects on developing fetus, crack babies, as they said. So this was the sort of atmosphere when I got out of the military in the mid-1980s, mid to late 1980s. As a result of this sort of feeling, this belief, Congress did what Congress does. It passed the law. It passed the now infamous crack powder laws called the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of '86 and '88, but it's known as the crack powder law. This is the law that punished violations for crack cocaine 100 times more harshly than violations for powder cocaine. One of the things that it did that we don't talk about as much is whenever we pass these new drug laws, it's always the first thing is increased funding for sort of selective occupations, largely law enforcement and other sort of groups. That's the number one thing that this thing really did, but we kind of focus on the differential between crack, the punishment differential between crack and powder. In this law, too, that was one of the things that when I read this law today, one of the things that was in the law was that the country would become drug-free by 1995. That was written in this law as well. Incredible. But it's okay. That happened, this law, and then what we started to see were the people who were being prosecuted for the law at the federal level. This is a federal law. Now, just to be clear, the punishment differential, what that meant was that if you were caught with 5 grams of crack cocaine, 5 grams, it's the size of a nickel. If you were caught with 5 grams of crack cocaine, you were required to go to prison for a mandatory 5 years. That's a minimum mandatory sentence. In order to trigger the same penalty for powder cocaine, you had to have 100 times more powder cocaine. So you had to have 500 grams of powder cocaine to trigger that same penalty. Now, one of the things that we noticed early on, as early as 1992, I say we, I mean the country, I didn't notice this at that time, was that the people who were overwhelmingly prosecuted were black, even though black people were not the major or the primary users of crack cocaine. You know, in a place like LA County, for example, in the 90s, LA County is quite diverse, and they had like 1,000 of these prosecutions. Not one white person was prosecuted under this law for crack cocaine. That's how egregious the enforcement of this law was. It was so egregious, it prompted Congress to ask the U.S. Sentencing Commission to study this issue. And the Sentencing Commission is a committee of judges that determines the penalty for infractions in this country. Anyway, when they submitted their report to Congress in '95, they said, well, yeah, the current law exaggerates the harm from crack cocaine, and the law should be equated. That is, crack and powder cocaine, they're the same drug, and the law should be equated. And so they submitted their recommendations to the president for signing. The president and Congress both said no. They rejected the recommendations of the Sentencing Commission. This was the first time that the recommendations of the Sentencing Commission was rejected. And subsequently, Bush II rejected the recommendations of the Sentencing Commission as well. Fast forward to 2007, Barack Obama ran on changing the law, because Barack Obama said that judges think that this is wrong, Republicans think that this is wrong, Democrats think that this is wrong, and yet it's been approved by Republican and Democratic presidents because no one is willing to brave the politics and make it right. He said that that would change when he became president. Did it change? Did it change? Anybody? You in the house? Well, in the Obama way, sort of, right? It didn't. The Obama administration, they decreased the disparity from 100 to 1 to 18 to 1, even though they are the same drug. And I'll say something more about that in the science part. And I like the Malcolm X quote when he says that if you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and then pull it out 6, there's no progress. basically. This is the only law that has a differential based on the route of administration, right? Crack is smoked, whereas powder is intravenous or snorted, and you still have that differential today. Now, so let's talk about some science, all right, just briefly. Crack and powder, they're the same drug. Just so we understand, so cocaine, powder cocaine, is a salt. A salt is an acid and a base. The acid is this red portion. This is the hydrochloride. That's the acid. And the base is the cocaine base. That's the only difference between crack and powder. The hydrochloride portion doesn't do anything pharmacologically. It just makes the compound stable such that it requires higher temperatures to smoke it, so high that the base will decompose before you can get any effects. So you have to remove the hydrochloride portion in order to smoke it. That's the only difference. So these are the same drug. So we're clear about that. In terms of crack's sort of uniquely addictive effects, part of the work that I have done throughout my career is I used to bring people into the laboratory and give them drugs as part of my studies. I studied crack cocaine along with powder cocaine and a number of other drugs. And just one simple experiment I'll describe to you all. I was interested in whether or not people who met criteria for crack cocaine addiction, these people met criteria, whether or not if you gave them a choice with something as little as like $5 or other choices, would they take that versus the crack cocaine? We were operating under the assumption that crack was so addictive that they would take every hit. What we found was something very simple. This graph just simply shows that when they were given a choice between $5 and crack, they chose money on about half of the occasion and crack on the other half. You increase the amount of money, they chose the money almost every time. And what that told us, along with other people, they've done similar studies, is that crack is not uniquely addictive, and people who use crack behave as rationally as other people because we placed all kind of demands on these people during these studies. Also, when we think about crack's effects being unpredictable. Now, I want to just be clear. Over the course of my career, I have given thousands of doses of crack cocaine to people in the laboratory. Now, we do that in order to primarily to see if we can find treatment medications to help people who are seeking treatment and see if we can find drugs that may block the effects of cocaine or drugs that will replace cocaine or what have you. But over the course of these studies, the thing that we have found mostly was that cocaine makes people happy. Cocaine produces pleasure, euphoria. In terms of treatment medications, we weren't as successful. One of the best sort of treatments for cocaine, it really is cocaine. And that's, it's not any different as replacing opioids with an opioid like methadone or even like heroin. It's not different. It's replacement therapy, same principles. Another thing that what we found was that cocaine's effects are lawful. That is, as you increase the dose on the x-axis, you get increasing effects. But you also, you can get tolerance, all of these sort of things that you see in pharmacology with any drug. So crack cocaine behaves, responds like any other drug. Its effects, as we say, are lawful. And we've discovered this from giving thousands of doses of crack cocaine. Just so you understand, your tax dollars support that kind of research that is going on around the country as we sit here now. And so when we vilify these drugs like we have, you have to wonder, at least I finally started to wonder, like, wait, hold up. We're saying this, but yet we're giving these drugs to people in the lab. Something is not right. It's not jiving. And something was not right. We've exaggerated the harmful effects of crack cocaine. That's one of the things that we've done. Another sort of thing that we've discovered in our studies is that we test people who meet criteria for crack cocaine addiction, test them cognitively, test them on a wide range of measures, and we find out that, you know what, people are cognitively intact. People they are not, they're brain damaged, as people have suggested, as comedians, as TV shows, as writers suggest. That's what the evidence shows. Okay, so that's now, when we think about crack cocaine policy and the scientific evidence and the policy, they don't match, they don't have anything to do with each other. I thought that they did, but they don't. So, but just so we know. And another example of this is with methamphetamine. Now, we take methamphetamine, for example, we're now talking about a different group of people who we don't like in the country. Before, with crack cocaine, we were talking about primarily black men. Now, with methamphetamine, fast forward to the late 1990s, methamphetamine use was said to be increasing. Mind you, less than 1% of Americans report using methamphetamine. But we got concerned about methamphetamine in the late 1990s, and this was primarily facilitated by internet sort of searches showing that how to make methamphetamine recipes. You can make methamphetamine with some common household products along with pseudoephedrine. People learned how to do that. And then as a result, we got kind of hysterical about methamphetamine. But methamphetamine, unlike crack cocaine, its use was associated with primarily poor white people and gay men, primarily. The governor of Oklahoma in '99 wanted to make sure it was clear who we were targeting when he was saying that it's a white trash drug. Methamphetamine largely are consumed by the lower socioeconomic elements of white people, and I think we need to shame it just like crack cocaine was a black trash drug and is a black trash drug. And so methamphetamine became the new villain. In the early 2000s, we started to see newspaper articles, magazines like Newsweek, saying that methamphetamine was America's most dangerous drug. And as a result, policy changed. We had the Combat Methamphetamine Epidemic Act of 2005. As I pointed out previously, the number one thing that happens is that there is an increased funding, largely for law enforcement, and of course, enhanced penalties. At the moment, methamphetamine is punished more harshly than any other drug in our country. Only 5 grams of methamphetamine. Now, that nickel worth of pure methamphetamine is enough to get people a mandatory minimum sentence of 5 years in prison. It's now punished even more harshly than crack cocaine. Now, when we think about what this means for people who go to jail or who are arrested for drugs, this slide here shows federal convictions for drugs over time. It shows methamphetamine in the black solid line and cannabis in the red dotted line over time, beginning at 2000 and goes to 2024. Now, The thing that is what's clear here is that prosecutions or convictions for methamphetamine are right now the main reason, methamphetamine is the main reason that people are going to federal prison for drugs. It used to be cannabis, but of course we have changed cannabis laws everywhere in the country except the South, of course. And so we began changing these cannabis laws about 2012, and you can see this inflection point, what happened with methamphetamine prosecutions or convictions. Now, methamphetamine, as I said, always less than 1% of Americans report having used that drug in the past year. Very low amount of Americans report using methamphetamine, whereas a number of Americans report using cannabis and always have, so it we kind of understood that. But given that methamphetamine use is so low, it's kind of surprising to see that it's the main reason that people are going to prison for drugs. Now, another thing that happened with this methamphetamine, the Combat Methamphetamine Epidemic Act, was that it required your local pharmacist to put pseudoephedrine behind the counter, and you had to show your driver's license or ID and sign a log in order to buy pseudoephedrine. And there were limits placed on how much pseudoephedrine you could purchase. And so what manufacturers did was that they simply replaced, out of Sudafed, they replaced the pseudoephedrine with phenylephrine. Phenylephrine is not as effective as pseudoephedrine. It doesn't work at the doses that are there. We all know that now, and people have said it even then, but it's still there. When you leave here, go to your pharmacist and ask for pseudoephedrine and see how you are treated. And so that's one of the consequences of this. Now, when we think about methamphetamine science, methamphetamine was said to be more addictive, more dangerous than amphetamine. Amphetamine, what is amphetamine? We have students in the house. Students, you all know about Adderall, right? Everybody? Adderall? Everybody? Anybody? All right, okay. Adderall, amphetamine, D-amphetamine is the main ingredient in Adderall. Basically, ADHD medication, and that's amphetamine, D-amphetamine. And methamphetamine, by the way, also is FDA approved to treat ADHD, just like Adderall. But no one will prescribe methamphetamine because of the sort of hysteria and the lore. Anyway, so the difference between these chemicals is one additional methyl group on methamphetamine. That's it. That additional methyl group has been said to make methamphetamine more lipid soluble, that is, get into the brain more quickly, and therefore it's more addictive, more dangerous, more toxic, whatever you want to add to that. That's what's been said. The evidence, however, does not support it. We and other people have done studies in which double-blind studies where we've given these drugs to people, both drugs at different doses under double-blind condition, and we've tested their cognitive performance, their mood, blood pressure, heart rate, all of those sort of things. And the drugs they produce nearly identical effects. Not only us, other people have done this as well, and so the drugs are the same, but that's not the lore. Another sort of thing, methamphetamine is not uniquely addictive as was said. Again, we did a simple study just like we did with crack cocaine, gave people a choice between money and doses of methamphetamine. We've increased the money all the way up to $20. When you do that, you can see this is the number of choices for the money. People take money nearly on every occasion. Some people have said, yeah, well, they're just taking the money in your experiments so they can go and purchase methamphetamine after the experiments are done. Maybe so. but that's their right. They earned it, right? And that also demonstrates that they are exercising some inhibitory control, some delayed gratification, all those things that we said are good, right? And so the point is that methamphetamine is not uniquely addictive. Another point, methamphetamine produces, again, lawful, predictable effects. These are just different doses of methamphetamine on something like systolic blood pressure and subjective ratings of euphoria. Increase the dose, increasing effects. We see tolerance, all of those things. It follows the normal pharmacological kind of pattern that you would expect. Methamphetamine is just like any other drug. Methamphetamine, another thing that was said about methamphetamine is that it caused brain damage. Some of you all may know the former president of the Philippines. He now sits in The Hague, and he's being prosecuted for his sort of war on drugs, his war on methamphetamine users. He said that because methamphetamine causes brain damage, which it doesn't at the doses that people are using, you can therefore kill people who use methamphetamine or who sell methamphetamine, and he's accused of killing thousands of Filipinos with no due process, and so he sits in The Hague because of that. Now, back to science. This is an article that appeared in the New York Times in 2004. Basically, it's entitled, "This is Your Brain on Meth, a Forest Fire of Damage." It's taken from a paper published in the Journal of Neuroscience, which is a pretty good journal. The problem is that, let me just see if I can make this as simple as possible. The study, what it did was compared people who use methamphetamine with people who do not use methamphetamine, and it did a brain imaging sort of comparison. A brain imaging comparison that looked at structure size. So 20 people who use methamphetamine, 20 people who do not use drugs. That's what was done. Now, what was said about what was done was that whenever there was some difference, the researchers interpreted that difference as pathology. So that's like taking people who are different in height and saying that the people who are shorter are height deficient, and that's a problem we need to fix. That's essentially what was done in this study. In this study, it also pointed out that they observed this selected pattern of cerebral deterioration. Now, in order to see deterioration, it means that you must measure multiple times to track to see if there's some change. They only took measurements once, but they're saying that this is a deterioration just based on the comparison of the control group, which is inappropriate. Now, I point this out because the scientific literature is replete with simple errors like that in terms of their interpretation. So the findings themselves are not problematic. It's the interpretations that become problematic because we have this normal range of human variability in structure sizes, in brain structure sizes. For example, there are regions in which men are, in general, have larger structures than women. But we wouldn't say that women, well, not in polite company, we wouldn't say that women are somehow pathological for having a smaller region, would we? No, we wouldn't. It's within the normal range of human variability. Are we understanding that? Cool. I published a paper reviewing the literature on brain imaging and methamphetamine in humans to highlight this, to point out where these problems were and to point out what the problem was. And essentially, the methamphetamine users' cognitive functioning fell within the normal range for their age and education when you do those appropriate controls. And essentially, even their brain structure sizes were within the normal range or within the range even of the controls. But any differences that researchers, not all, but many researchers, any differences were interpreted as pathology. And that's the problem, that interpretation, or those types of interpretations. Now, as I continued throughout my career, I noticed these kinds of simple errors. And it started to trouble me in part because I know that people were paying the price. That is, people were going to jail, people were being vilified. And then, it took me maybe 45 years of my life to even start to understand this issue of liberty. And I grew up in Miami in a place called Carroll City. And the next town over is called Liberty City. And I didn't even know what liberty was, really, like what liberty means. And so that's remarkable. But in my 40s, I started to think about this issue of liberty. And then thinking about just basic sort of human rights, these things that we say are inalienable, like bodily autonomy. Every democratic nation professes to protect this thing called bodily autonomy. Basically, you are in control of what happens with your body, not me, not your government. Simple. And so that means that if you decide that you want to alter your consciousness, why do I care? People say, well, you might break the law, you might harm somebody. Yeah, we have laws for those things. That's exactly right. That's why we have law. But if you decide to do this in the privacy of your own home, which the Constitution claims to protect, this issue of privacy, and not to mention what the country was founded on, this life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, not to mention that the framers of this Constitution, and particularly the author of the Declaration of Independence, they all use drugs like opioids. And so when I think about those sort of things and how we are behaving today, particularly with my knowledge of pharmacology, it blows my mind. And that's why I go back to the beginning, where it's like explaining to people that laughter is good, and that people like to be euphoric, as many of these drugs, certainly the drugs that I was talking about today, they can produce euphoria. It's remarkable that people want some euphoria, and people don't seem to understand that that's a basic right. So, thinking about these kind of issues, I have to go back to history and think about, when did we ban drugs in the first place? Well, the first sort of national drug laws was passed in 1914. It was called the Harrison Act. The Harrison Act was an act basically to do record keeping, to make sure we kept tabs on who were prescribing or dealing in opioids and cocaine. That's all it was, a tax act. People paid $1 and they registered. And, but that tax act, passage of that act was controversial. They tried to pass that act in 1909. It failed because American citizens at the time were outraged that the federal government would try to regulate what they could take and put in their bodies. Fast forward to 1914, newspapers, scientific journals started to pair cocaine use with black people, specifically black men. And newspaper articles, scientific articles, like this one would say, Negro cocaine fiends are a new Southern menace. And they'd argue that when black people took cocaine, they became more murderous, they became unaffected by 32 caliber bullets, and they became better marksmen. I mean, these are some of the arguments that are in this article, but this is also in the scientific literature, and it was compelling because it helped to pass the 1914 Harrison Act. And that, to be clear, so we understand that many Americans supported this sort of passage. Even black people were on board with this passage. So I want us to understand that this isn't just one group, but there is one group that's vilified, but it wasn't one group just participating in the passage. And then I also think about 1937 and the Marijuana Tax Act. This act was intent to ban cannabis, which it did in 1937. Think about what was happening in 1937. It was shortly after Prohibition, which ended in 1933, the end of 1933. You have all of these narcotic officers who enforced that law. Now they need something to do. And so they need a new mission. Marijuana was their new mission. And we banned marijuana at the federal level. But in New York, our mayor at the time, LaGuardia, he smelled the rat. And he said, no, something's fishy here, because he had been a representative from New York in Congress previously, and he had read studies on cannabis, and so he did not believe it. He commissioned a study in New York, which is called the LaGuardia Report, and it took like 7 years to publish. In it, the conclusions was basically the evidence used to pass the Marijuana Tax Act was exaggerated, and that marijuana was not the villain that it was made out to be. 1944, the LaGuardia Act was passed, and it was a huge document, and even by today's scientific standards, it was good work. But we did not do anything about it in New York until 2021, which was 77 years later. We in New York legalized cannabis for adult use in 21, and the state has not fallen apart. Colorado, Washington, they did it in 2012, and a growing number of other states did it in the intervening period. You guys still have not legalized cannabis here, right? But as I drove in, I saw that you can get THC-infused drinks and that sort of. It's remarkable. These inconsistencies are just remarkable, that we live with. And it's remarkable because people paid a price. People went to jail. People's lives were destroyed as a result of these shenanigans in order to make sure we have funding for select members of our society. That's the real reason. And in order to get that funding, you must pair this kind of drug use, this thing, with undesired groups, and then you can commence behaving in ways that we are behaving today, for example, like blowing up ships in the Caribbean. Remarkable. And with the justification that they're bringing drugs. You still get due process, basic human rights, right? So these are the kind of things that are happening. But now, I'm going to end shortly here, but I have to say something about opioids because I know that's the new thing that everybody talks about and everybody's concerned. All right, so this is a line graph. I've been showing these line graphs. This is drug-involved overdose deaths over time, beginning at 2015 until now. You can see around 100,000 people or deaths have been drug-involved. Now, I have this listed in the way that the CDC has it listed as drug-involved. Now, drug-involved does not mean that the drug caused the death. Just means that a drug is suspected of being involved or a drug has been determined to be involved. But it doesn't mean that the drug caused the death. Another thing about these line graphs is that there are some assumptions with line graphs. The assumption is that the data are all the same or they've been collected in the same manner and we're talking about the same thing. Now, when it comes to drug-involved deaths, those two things are violated because for a number of reasons. The people who are primarily investigating drug-involved deaths are coroners. Now, in order to be a coroner in most jurisdictions, the only thing you need to do is be elected, be a registered voter. Now, many people think that, well, medical examiners are doing this type of investigation and they're doing it primarily with an autopsy. Not the case. Most of these deaths are investigated by coroners. And there are no federal standards or national standards how you investigate death. And so it varies widely from jurisdiction to jurisdiction in terms of evidence, bodily evidence, whether or not the drug is actually in the system. There's no requirement that people even do toxicology. And there is no requirement that people do autopsies, and autopsies are done rarely, even though they are recommended to be done every time there is a suspected drug-involved overdose death. And so as we think that we know what these numbers mean, we really don't. Now, to bring this point home, we all were home in the summer of 2020. Many of us saw how George Floyd was killed. Now, George Floyd had in his system nicotine, he had methamphetamine, fentanyl, and cannabis. Originally, they said that George Floyd died from an overdose. But then we saw the video and we saw that Derek Chauvin choked George Floyd to death. Now, on his death certificate, methamphetamine and fentanyl are contributors to his death. So George Floyd's data are likely included in the 2020 data as a drug-involved deaths. And so that's what's happening thousands of times across the country in order to make sure that Americans fear drugs, specifically opioids. It is true, some people do die of a drug-related overdose, but these numbers are wildly exaggerated. And if you don't believe me, just ask for the evidence, as I have been doing, and they won't give it to me. So just ask for the evidence. And I think I'm gonna end with my take-home message, and then we'll have a discussion. I hope it was enough to give you all some things to talk about. So as I think about drugs throughout my career, I used to believe that drugs were illegal because they were so dangerous to the population and we were protecting the population. And that's why they were illegal. Because of their unique pharmacology, that's why they were illegal. I no longer believe that based on evidence today. The main reasons that we have drugs be illegal is because there is a lot of money in making drugs illegal. As we think about the opioid situation today, there are so many different people's hands in the pot, from pharmacists to coroners to law enforcement, we know, to scientists, to so many people's hands are in the pot. And so as long as we have that situation where we are paying people to be complicit, we will have these laws. That's why I'm asking you all to think about liberty and the principles that we all claim to believe in. Just simple liberty. How one would arrest or vilify someone for what they are putting in their own bodies. Now, we do this in part because of this engineered association between that drug or some drug and a despised group. And it kind of eases the American sort of conscience about trampling on people's rights. As we think about what we're watching on our television sets today, as people's rights are being trampled on, and who is being vilified. This situation today has its feet in the way we have dealt with drugs. So I'm asking you all, as you hear people vilify people who use some drug, calling someone a crackhead or something of that nature, I'm asking you just to ask them, why do they vilify people for what they put in their bodies? Just something as simple as that. It's a simple ask. And I'm asking you to think about some behavior that you engage in which someone may object to, even though it's your body. Thank you for your time.
All right, so thanks a lot. Let's jump right into it because I promised that there'll be time for questions from the audience, but let me jump in with a question real quick. The title of your talk was about for grown-ups. So if I'm 17 years old and 364 days, I don't have agency. But at 17 years old, 365 days, I have agency over my body. What happened overnight that makes it, I don't have agency when I went to bed, but I woke up with agency? Or is there a cutoff to where you would say, okay, now someone has agency beyond having some type of acuity test or something?
The age thing. So I went into the military at 17. So I had to have my mother sign because I wasn't 18. And that's just the way that the law is. It's just that's what the society has decided. There's not anything magical about 18, although there is this thing, this theory that has become like evidence. For example, people talk about the prefrontal cortex not being developed until early 20s and so forth. Yeah, it's one of the last sort of structures to be fully developed, if there's such a thing, because we're always developing. I don't think that has any bearing on this because there are people who are younger, who are teens, who have a lot of practice with something like inhibitory control, whereas there are adults who still can't do inhibitory control very well because they haven't had as much practice. And so I don't think there's anything magical about the age myself.
But if it's grown-ups, right, if we're saying what distinguishes when someone becomes, I'm just going back off the title of your talk.
No, that's all right. That's a different question.
Someone needs to have...
No, that's a different question.
Okay.
So the title of the book is Drug Use for Grown-Ups. I understand the country in which I live and where I'm selling books. And so I wanted to, in the book, I was basically saying that drug use or the effects of these drugs are predominantly positive. So if you say that statement in our country, in 21, when I said it, I knew it would be seen as controversial. Controversial just means that people are too lazy to think about evidence. That's all it means. And so it doesn't, now I knew that would be the case, so I had to point out that I'm talking about drug use for grown-ups, and I defined people who I was talking about, people who are responsible, people who take care of their responsibilities, families, and so forth. So I didn't have people who were disingenuous jump in the conversation and say, what about the children? You know, as if, you know, so like children have parents and their parents have sex. And so no one's saying, why are you having sex? You have children. Or aren't you afraid your children might engage in sex? But when it comes to the drugs, that's what they say. And so that's why I said drug use for grown-ups to deal with the disingenuous people from the start.
Sure. Look, this is sponsored by the Center for Ethics here in the Murphy Institute. Is there any evidence or possibility that drug-induced euphoria could impact people's morality? Could because someone is happily drug-induced, their moral compass is more towards being more moral and ethical towards their peers, or as you said, will anyone on drugs just become villains and engage in every type of immorality possible?
Yeah, we have examples in our society with alcohol. Think about people who drink alcohol. Sometimes people who drink alcohol might behave in ways that they wouldn't otherwise behave if they weren't intoxicated. So certainly there's a possibility that people might be intoxicated and behave in ways in which they regret. That's a fact. We think about people who go on spring break. This is a college. Sometimes people sleep with people and they regret it, and they'll be like, shit, well, but it was spring break. And so they regret it. Sure, that certainly can happen with drugs. The wide range of possibilities exists with drugs as with any other behavior. They are not unique.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me switch up, and then we're going to open this up to you folks, because, you know, we could just sit here and talk the whole time, but no one came here to hear me. They really want to just talk to you. But let me ask you about this, the future. There was a time when there was only powdered cocaine, and then somebody came up with this thing, crack cocaine. And then there was a time when there wasn't this, and then this new manifestation of that thing showed up. Do you predict or see a time where we're sitting here now, and in 2030, there's a new thing, right? The same way at some point there was not crack cocaine, and then there was, and any insights into where that new unknown thing might come from?
Yeah, so there was always smokable cocaine. So people called it freebase at one time, but people always knew how to smoke cocaine. Crack just made it more widely available and easier. And yeah, every now and then there are, I mean, particularly as you ban drugs, humans, they are industrious, and they figure out ways, other sort of chemical modifications to try to achieve the effects that they seek. So sure, absolutely. That's a concern. That's one of the reasons that it's nice for me to think about drugs that we know about, and if we regulate those drugs, not ban them, but regulate them, I think that's a smarter approach.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I promise that this is it for me, and so, and then we're going to let the audience get on. Right, we had you said prohibition, right? And I'm thinking back to the period where alcohol was made illegal, right? But then that prohibition was repealed, right?
Yes.
What's the difference? What's happening here that didn't or can't or won't happen in that case?
So prohibition was repealed, as you know, during the Great Depression. And the promise was that Americans would no longer have to pay income tax because the sale tax from alcohol would be so great that you all wouldn't have to pay income tax. And so with that promise, people voted to repeal prohibition, one, and people were still drinking even during prohibition, but it was a lot more dangerous because of the adulterants that were placed in illicit alcohols. Some of those adulterants were placed there by the federal government. And so people didn't stop drinking, and people will always find ways to alter their conscience. People will always get high.
All right, let's do this. There are some people who have microphones. Do not try and take the microphones out of the hands of the people. See what happens when you try and take the microphones? They will hold the microphones, and if you just raise your hand, we'll let Dr. Hart try and get to as many questions from you folks. The first hand I saw come up was right here, so let's, don't worry, someone will, don't take the microphone.
Yes, Mr. Hart, Dr. Hart, I've read your book. I was very impressed with it. I'm completely behind it. I read it in 2021. I worked in a residential treatment center for 5 years. It's called Odyssey House. I'm not going to cry. I agree that there is a financial incentive to residential treatment places. But I've met people who are really struggling to give up the 3 big ones: crack cocaine, methamphetamines, and heroin. And in your book, I didn't see anything where you addressed what you do about folks who can't use drugs like grown-ups. And I would like you to address that, please.
Yeah, thank you for the question, and thank you for reading the book. I try to address that issue, and I thought I did, in that I say that drug addiction has very little to do with the drugs themselves. Many of the treatment programs focus on the drugs as if the drug is the thing. When you think about the symptoms that people have to endorse in terms of addiction, there are 11 symptoms that vary widely. And people, from one person to another, they endorse a different set of symptoms. And so those are the things that treatment folks, should work on. For example, let me just, I thought I addressed this issue also when I talked about heroin. In the United States, we like to say things like we're doing everything we can to help people who are on opioids. And it's just simply just not true. And I use the example of Switzerland, the Netherlands, the UK, Spain. I use the examples of places that, for example, who have heroin clinics where people who are addicted to heroin can go and get 100% grade, pharmaceutical grade of heroin as part of their treatment. But they also have a social worker, nurse, psychiatrist, internist. The majority of the people in the Swiss clinics, one of the ones in which I did a sabbatical in, the majority of those people are working, and they are productive members of society, and more importantly, they are happy. And in the United States, in our scientific literature, we don't even acknowledge that that literature exists, and that literature has existed for nearly 3 decades, and it continues to grow. Our neighbors to the north of us have programs like similar, not quite, but similar. So our neighbors to the north has acknowledged this. And so treating addiction is not that complicated. It only becomes complicated when you become moralistic. If you become moralistic about it, it's complicated. But if you're not, and you let people choose their treatment, and you support people like they do in Switzerland, it's not complicated.
Maybe it's me.
I'll repeat the question. Just say it.
Now that mic just worked. He just talked into that mic.
So my name is Carol, and
I'm sorry, I couldn't see that. I just thought you were African. No, go on.
can see as a Black and Latino person is the U.S. The spearhead of this policy internationally. So I'd like to zone out from the U.S. to zone in geopolitically. But as strange as it might sound, before I have never seen like so many people using drugs as I've seen here, like this Adderall usage in college campus. I didn't see that, even attending like public university in Brazil and then doing my master's in criminal science in Brazil. So for a decade, really, I didn't. So as my peoples, since I'm Black and Latino, my peoples are seen as the problem internationally. I'd like you to please to address how do you see the prevention at home so there might not be such a demand from those drugs coming in. I don't know, how do you see the prevention part at the national stage, considering the role of the United States in demonizing my peoples? That's it.
I'm sorry, where are you from?
Brazil.
Where?
Brazil.
Okay. So you said you didn't see much drug use in Brazil.
There is a lot of drug use, but I've met more people here
Yeah.
using drugs than I've met in my country, which was like blind mode.
Yeah.
I'm not saying there is no drug. This is
okay.
a problem there.
It's
but
okay. I just wanted to be clear so I could. Okay. So think that leave some space for the possibility that maybe you were sheltered in Brazil. So the best cocaine I've ever had, Brazil, by far. Yeah, best cocaine in the world, even better than Colombia. Now, and people are using drugs in Brazil. I go to Brazil a lot, and so that's just not people, we vilify South America, particularly Colombia and now Venezuela, because that's what we do in America. We are racist in some respect, and that's what that's about. That's whether it's drugs or something else. Now, this notion of prevention, it's what you have to think about what you're trying to prevent, because when you talk about prevention, it's like saying that you're trying to prevent an orgasm. Or how do we stop people from orgasm? It's like if people are seeking and enjoying drug use, what's wrong with that? They're not harming folks, or nothing's wrong with that. So when you think about prevention, I think you're talking about prevention in terms of abuse or addiction, that kind of thing. But you hope if we had better education, for example, we teach people some things about, like people get harmed from the adulterants in the illicit drug market. If we as a society would have some supportive services so people can go out and have their drugs tested to make sure that there are not adulterants in their drugs, so they can get education about what doses that they should be using, what routes of administration, how to use these things, all of that kind of real education. What's the time course of effects so people don't expect an effect too quickly and keep putting more in the system. All of this helps to prevent the problems. But when we're living in such a moralistic place, we can't even talk about this activity like it's a good thing.
We've got time for 2 more questions here. We're going to take right, Brittany, right there. Yep.
Hi, is this on? Maybe it's on. Thanks so much for coming and talking with us. I'll get right to the point. So I graduated in high school in 2005 in a place called West Virginia. Some years before, one of the first pill mills in America opened up in Portsmouth, Ohio. And the place where I lived in West Virginia became basically the site of a controlled experiment in the extensive prescription of high-powered opiates to lots of people in the population. So a lot of the things you say about the drug treatment, about how we can conduct drug treatment, were basically conducted in this sort of form, right? It was highly regulated. Certain amounts were given to certain types of people. Purity was guaranteed because it was produced by pharmaceutical companies, et cetera, et cetera. And it has permanently ruined, in many ways, many of the towns and cities in the Ohio Valley where I grew up. So I guess I'm just curious. You said a little bit about heroin and a little bit about opiates in your talk, and it had to do just with sort of debunking the death statistics. I just wonder if you can talk a little bit more about concretely what rampant heroin addiction has done to America. My dad was a heroin addict. I've had many friends who've died of heroin overdoses. Very bad stuff, right? And I think anybody who's ever been around this sort of knows this intuitively. I'll just say one more thing. In the city where I lived in Huntington, West Virginia, basically all city services have been retooled to be just used to treat drug overdoses. A huge amount of the public budget is now used to just sort of distribute Narcan, fire services, ambulance services.
I'm going to ask you to ask me a question because you made a lot of statements that does not have factual information to support. So stick with one line because this is too important to not answer you right. And so stick with one line of question because this notion.
I'm setting up a question, and there are certainly facts that are a part of it. My question is basically this: your argument seems to be pointed at something like we need to loosen the regulation on as many drugs as possible, including things like opiates, because this is what liberty means, so on and so on and so forth. And I guess I just want you to respond to, that there was a moment, especially with regard to one of these top 3, as one of the earlier questions was, right? Like one of these big drugs that is very powerful and really rampant in our society. We had this experiment with this sort of thing, and it was OxyContin, and it was the prescription of this stuff to a lot of people, and that seems to me like something that I just want to hear you say something about that in the question of legalization.
Yeah. What a question. Has that been good for us? That's not even a fair question. Has that been good for us? Let's just talk about oxycodone and West Virginia. We think about West Virginia and we think about the depressed population. We think about all of the problems that are in West Virginia. And long before drugs were there, you had these problems in West Virginia. The water, all of these problems in West Virginia. That's number 1. 2, when we think about OxyContin and oxycodone, I know the story. The thing that happened was that the pharmaceutical company, they got their drug scheduled at a lower schedule, at Schedule 3 instead of Schedule 2. And they paid a fine, they paid a price for that. That's a fact. That happened. Now, in terms of, is OxyContin uniquely addictive, or if it's some new, potent, powerful opioid? Of course not. It's about like morphine. It's about like heroin. I don't understand this scapegoating of oxycodone for problems that exist. It's in West Virginia, do they get pure heroin? Of course not. They get a lot of contaminated drugs, and a lot of the contaminated drugs are the problem. I don't even know if you can get heroin in West Virginia anymore. You have a lot of contaminated fentanyl in West Virginia. Fentanyl is more potent than heroin. And if people think that they have heroin and they have fentanyl and they take the same amount that they would with heroin, that could be a problem. But that's not the drug problem. That's a problem of our enforcement and what we're doing. And that's a problem of ignorance, us not making sure that people understand what they have. Now, in terms of the jobs in West Virginia, or the lack thereof jobs, we need to make sure that people have jobs in West Virginia. I don't know what else to say. You know, I'm sorry about your father, but trust me, people who are addicted to opioids, they will be the folks who probably are less likely to have an overdose because they will have tolerance to opioids. I worked in a heroin clinic for a while. I've been around heroin. I've taken heroin. I know these things too. I mean, this thing that parades in the public of heroin being this monster, it's just simply not true. It's just not the case. It's true that people have problems. That's a fact. But we have to really get to the bottom of people's problems. And scapegoating a drug is not going to solve anybody's problems.
One last quick one. The young lady was almost standing up, but you got to make this fast. You can't say it in a minute or less than a minute. Don't try and take our mic.
Yes, sorry. Hi, my name is Nicole. I'm an undergrad psych student. I'm also a Venezuelan immigrant. So you're talking about the cyclical effect of like pairing crack with blackness and pairing meth with gay men and white and poor white men. And so now we're seeing that with Venezuelan immigrants and drug trafficking, even though drug traffickers are less likely to, Venezuelan immigrants are less likely to be drug traffickers than US-born citizens. And so the data does not support these correlations and has not supported these correlations. How do you, in your daily life, speak to people that have been indoctrinated by making these correlations despite the research saying otherwise? Because I am at a loss.
Well, you're joining me. I'm at a loss too. My mother is going to have her 85th birthday here soon, and I can't get my mother to stop vilifying drug users. And she knows what I do, and so I'm at a loss too. That's why I was trying my damnness to try to ask people to do something very simple. Just deliver to other people their liberty. That's it. If we deliver people's liberty, we allow people bodily autonomy. If we simply do that, then it takes away this sort of disingenuous creating of enemies. And that's what we've done. We have this disingenuous creation of enemies based on people's bodily autonomy. And we have allowed it as a society. If people want to alter their consciousness, why do we care? As long as they're not preventing others from doing the same or breaking the law otherwise. So we have to make sure that we fight for people's bodily autonomy. That's the only way that I can see it.
Look, let me do this before we wrap up, and before I even finish up and thank Dr. Hart. This doesn't happen without the dedicated work of everyone here at the Murphy Institute. So what I would like to do, and I would like you to also do, is would you please acknowledge the staff? They're the ones in the back with the name badges on. And I always want to acknowledge the staff and all of our, watch this, all of our Murphy affiliates. If you are somehow affiliated with the Murphy Institute by postdoc, teaching, something else, please just stand up for a second. Let me show you the other people who are our Murphy affiliates around here. But most importantly, he's not going anywhere, right? So all of you who didn't get to ask a question, I'll hold him here. He's not going to leave, but we have to wrap this up, especially for those who are live streaming. So, help. Uh-oh.
Just one.
Hey,
One final.
You always can. This is your show. Right.
I just want to ask people to think about people go skiing. Skiing, particularly on black diamond sort of courses, can be really dangerous and people can hurt themselves. But yet people still do it, and we haven't banned that activity because we understand that in life there are risks, and that makes us human, and we engage in those risks. And drug use is just like that. I can't guarantee you that there will never be any harm or any injuries. That's just like saying that we shouldn't have people drive cars anymore, because every year 40,000 Americans lose their life on the highway. But we haven't banned driving. But yet we ban drugs. And we haven't, well, I'm in the South, we haven't banned guns. They're designed to kill people. And I'm having to argue that it's our right to use a drug to be happy when you allow the sale of guns. This is a sick country.
There you go. Thank Dr. Hart for his time here. And feel free to come on up and ask questions. That concludes our time. Thank you all for coming, too. Really appreciate you.